Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Thursday morning, we are in between meetings with President Biden and Senator Capito. They met in person Wednesday. Reportedly, according to CNN, Biden came down to $1 trillion. But now the hang-up is how much of that should be new money. Because the Republican offer before Wednesday was 926, 962, something like that. But only 257 billion new money. Biden wants it all to be new money. And they have plans to reconnect on Friday. So I have probably been the only optimist about this negotiation process, and I'm not someone who's saying that like this is guaranteed to happen. But do you look at that as this is negotiation? You know, they're moving. They each made some moves towards each other, and let's see where this goes. Or are you like, this gulf's still just too big? $1 trillion, 257 billion, like it's too much. They can't do it.
Well, I don't even know how optimistic or pessimistic I am. I just think that this process is pretty healthy. I know that people are concerned, progressives especially, are probably concerned that it's a waste of time. Well, this is what the U.S. Senate is, and I think it's worth taking the time to make a good faith attempt, if you're Joe Biden, to get some sort of compromise. And then if the Republicans don't play ball, then you have your answer. Mm-hmm. So I don't see it as wasted time. I see it as, this is the part of the process, and also West Virginia represent.
West Virginia is you've already written about this. I mean, the fact that Manchin and Capito are the biggest, players in town is really amazing. Yeah. I mean, not just that they represent a small,
don't forget we're giving away guns as
right,
well.
That's right.
So there's a lot going on.
I mean, it's not just that a lightly populated state is the balance of power in the Senate. This is the second most Trumpy state in the country, next to Wyoming. And it has produced two senators who are the most interested in bipartisan compromise in each party, it seems. I mean, maybe Susan Collins would whine to me about that. But I mean, Capito has had the most face-to-face time with Biden about what's up with negotiating of any Republican senator in the first 6 months of his administration. And I assume neither one feels that they're taking a political risk at home in doing that. I don't think either one's getting a lot of backlash from their constituents.
In fact, Joe Manchin says, go ahead come here and campaign against me. You're only going to help me. So
one point he's saying, what's the worst that happens? I get to go home. He's been threatening that he'll just up and leave, and that's
West
a real
Virginia,
threat to Democrats because no other Democrat can hold that seat but him.
Yes, I think that's definitely true. I think West Virginia still has, and it's getting more. I mean, people are moving in. The population of West Virginia is declining, but the areas that are gaining population are the Eastern Panhandle, where I'm sitting, people from Maryland and Virginia and D.C., and then up in Morgantown by WVU, I guess people from Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh area. But I do think still that West Virginia has that parochial aspect that Shelley Moore Capito, her dad was governor of the state. Joe Manchin's been around a long time.
Her dad was imprisoned after being governor of the state.
Well, there were some mistakes that were made, Bill, and yet they elected her. That's my point.
Right.
My point They still elected her.
My favorite story in that vein is Buddy Cianci, mayor of Providence, was in prison, for assault, and he gets out, he runs again, and the slogan is, "I never stopped caring about Providence."
The Prince of Providence, baby. I interviewed him one time on my podcast. Yeah. The guy moved a river, literally. No, but I think West Virginia still has kind of this parochial thing where, he's our guy, she's our gal, and the ideology doesn't matter, it doesn't factor as much into it. There's something to be said for that. I can tell you, having managed a campaign a couple decades ago in North Dakota, it's very frustrating to try to run like an insurgent campaign in a state like that. My candidate ran against Earl Pomeroy. There was a time, this is in
Pomeroy the early 2000s. Was a Democratic congressperson, the at-large House member. And North Dakota, small rural state, everybody by name. Pomeroy had a good bond with the constituents, right?
It was one of those things where North Dakota went for Bush, like dramatic margins. They were for Bush. They had John Hoeven was the governor, Republican governor. Republicans dominated the state house. They had the insurance commissioner, you name it. Republicans had the attorney general, Wayne Stingham. They had everything, except Democrats had all three, federal seats.
Right, both senators and a congressperson.
Dorgan, Conrad, and Pomeroy, and all of them, we call them the three amigos. Like, they had each been the driver for the other one. I think like Earl Pomeroy started off like driving Byron Dorgan, and Dorgan started off driving Conrad, and it was like this very weird incestuous thing. And I remember like going in and I would go into like bars and like, my off-duty hours and ask people like, what would it take for you to vote against Earl Pomeroy? Mm-hmm. And like, I came to the conclusion that if I said like, did you know that Earl Conroy, did you know that that Pomeroy, murdered 20 people? And they'd be like, oh, don't you know that Earl's a good guy? I betcha. Earl wouldn't have done that on purpose, don't you know? I mean, it was like, you could say, like, there was nothing, and nothing would outrage them. If I'm like, he voted, I'm just making so. Actually, we had a thing where, before, in the run up to the Iraq War, members of Congress had the opportunity to go and read some intel that no one else was privy to. And I don't know if we ever found out if Earl had done that or not, that you had to sign in and go into this room and read this information. But basically it was one of those things where like, no matter what you said about Earl Pomeroy, they were like, that's Earl's a good guy, don't you know? I mean, it was like, it was impossible. And if you said like he voted, there was nothing you could have said. Mm-hmm. And it's very frustrating. I think it's probably how it is here in West Virginia too. Mm-hmm. And in some cases that's a good thing maybe.
So I wrote before the Wednesday meeting that this is for the Washington Monthly, that there's a better chance for a deal here than a lot of people think. That at the end of last week, there was a lot of commentary after Republicans filibustered the 1-6 commission. This just goes to show that Manchin's whole philosophy is out of gas. They're not going to compromise anything. Republicans got their concessions on the commission. They still voted against it. And my reaction was, the commission is about investigating Trump. Republicans don't want to do that. Infrastructure is about roads and bridges in their districts. That's a whole different thing. That doesn't make Trump mad. And you just look at what the people close to the negotiations were saying. They're feeling. I mentioned just before that there is some hang up over this new spending divide. But when Capitol put forth their initial proposal, and some Democrats like Bernie Sanders like this is BS. This is there's no new money here. The White House statement was this is encouraging. This is encouraging that they're nearing $1 trillion. This gets a little attention. There is a surface transportation bill So part of it, surface transportation is a decent component of infrastructure. That is roads, bridges, transit, and we're at the end of a 5-year surface transportation bill. They got to reauthorize that program. There's a $303 billion bill to do just that for over 5 years. It cleared the Environment and Public Works Committee last week unanimously. It even includes a pilot for this vehicle mileage tax, which I think we talked about in the past show, and I wrote about. This is somewhat of a controversial idea. There's a pilot program for that in the bill. The White House said they support the bill, and it is aligned with Biden's infrastructure initiatives. That $303 billion is not all new money. It is mostly not new money. It is $78 billion of new money. And you don't see the White House nitpicking about that fact. So my sense going into the meeting was that's not going to be, the hang-up. Not that it's not a hang-up, but you're not seeing the White House go out of its way to make that a red line.
Explain to me again, you did this before, but explain to us again the new money versus not new money.
Well, we had a 5-year transportation bill over the past 5 years. The highway, I think it's highway plus transit. If you're remembering that, not quite right, but there's a bulk of money that's essentially that surface transportation that came out to about $225 billion. So if you extend that program for another 5 years, aiming at $303 billion, that's $78 billion more than it was. Whereas if you just reauthorized it status quo, it'd be $225 billion, but it wouldn't be more money than you had been spending on these programs.
But should you assume that something couldn't you argue that reauthorizing something is new money because it doesn't have to be reauthorized?
You could. You certainly, and I'm sure that's the kind of thing that Capito and other Republicans are saying. But that's where these definitions are subject to interpretation. Okay. That's a good distinction to make. I do think this, Bill. The thing we're going to learn, I think, is so we know that Republicans are willing to vote with Biden because they've done it. Mm-hmm. We know that in this committee they voted for it. This bill.
Well, not just in the committee and they have not filibustered a lot of Biden bills.
Well, there's only been one filibuster so far, which is the 1-6 Commission bill. Senate did pass a $35 billion water infrastructure bill. They did pass the anti-hate crimes bill. They did pass the PPP extension. They did pass suspension of Medicare cuts. So there have been things that have happened in the past 5 months.
So we know that Republicans aren't going to reflexively try to block everything. Number two, we know that Republicans are willing to spend money. The question is, are they willing to, I think this is the question, are Republicans willing to give Biden a big win on a big kind of landmark? It's probably not the right term, but on a big agenda item, or will they block that to try to basically prevent Biden from accomplishing agenda items? We don't know that yet, do we?
I mean, we don't know it. All I can say is, Capito is there. She has put forth these proposals. She has gotten support for doing that, not just from a rogue group of 10 Republicans, but from McConnell. McConnell has referred to Capito as their negotiator. After Capito's offer last week, McConnell was on CNBC and he said, this is not the final offer. We can spend more. Now, some Democrats look at that and say, this is another Lucy in the football trick. They're trying to drag things out and they're going to move the goalposts eventually and not actually do it. I can't predict what they're going to do. Yeah. All I can say is their messaging is not Biden's plan is horrible and we should rally our forces to kill it. Their messaging is we should try to find middle ground and pass an infrastructure bill. Right. So if they do pull the football, they haven't set themselves up to win politically in doing that. And not only would they probably not kill the bill, they would give Manchin the freedom to say, hey, Republicans are being ridiculous here. I'm going to get this bill passed with Joe Biden through reconciliation. It will be bigger. You'll get all these wonderful things. And only us Democrats did it. So there is a cost for Republicans to pull that football.
So it was 1.9 originally. That was the Biden proposal.
2.3. 2.3 trillion. So Biden started. Right, 1.9 was the rescue plan. The jobs plan was 2.3 trillion. Now Biden has this publicly, as far as I know, but CNN reported that he privately said to Capito yesterday, I can do 1 trillion, but it's got to be new money. Now, I don't know if got to was like a hard red line, but that was the proposal.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this. It seems like the option is you get either Democrats get everything they wanted and do it via reconciliation, or you get 10 Republicans and you get the compromise. Would it be worth making a compromise if it meant you got 5 Republicans? You still did it via reconciliation, but you can say it's bipartisan. Is it worth giving up the money you might have gotten by doing it on a party line vote in order to say that it was bipartisan? If you can't get 10.
Well, it's not just a question of is it worth it? It is what will Joe Manchin let you do? I mean, Joe Manchin might think that it's worth it. Joe Manchin might say, I think it is so important that we do something bipartisan. We got to heal this country. We are too divided. What happened with the 1-6 Commission, sickened me. So some Democrats said, hey, Joe Manchin, look what they did in 1-6. Screw these bastards. Go on without them. Yeah. Manchin might say, this sickens me. We have to do something to heal us. If 1-6 can't do it, we need something else to do it. So this is one hypothetical. Capito says to Joe Biden, look, I just can't do 1 trillion new money. Look, I talked to my people. I talked to McConnell. I talked to Roger Wicker. I talked to Roy Blunt. They can only do 350 in new money. That is the best I can do. I wish I could do more, but I just can't. I can't get 10 for it. And maybe that makes Joe, because Joe Manchin reportedly is talking to Romney, Portman, Collins separately from Capito. So maybe they swoop in after Capito comes in short and says, hey, we can go higher. We can do 550. We can do 550 in new money. And it can't get 10 Republicans, but I can get at least 4, maybe 5 or 6. And we'll do that through reconciliation. But since, again, this is Joe Manchin talking, and that is hypothetical. Since President Biden, I can get these Republicans to do it. I think it's so important that we have this bipartisan. You don't have my vote for reconciliation without them. I will limit you to this proposal.
Yeah.
I think that is a possible scenario if Biden and Capito can't come.
Is that being talked about? Because I feel like the options that we're assuming, not you and I, but the conversation is assuming, is either 50 votes or 60 votes. Those are the two options. And is this possibility, the Manchin possibility, being discussed?
I mean, this is wholly my speculation. I'm like way going beyond what I've seen reported anywhere. All I know is that Manchin is talking to Romney, Collins, Portman, separate from Capito. That's all I know. Now, the other wrinkle here, I don't know if you caught this yesterday, is that the parliamentarian put out a new ruling about how much Democrats can use reconciliation. Because there was a report a month ago that Schumer said, hey, the parliamentarian did a new ruling, and they say we can do reconciliation multiple times off of one budget resolution. So that means we can do this, multiple times, not just one more time. And just yesterday, the parliamentarian said, not so fast. You can only really do that in a case of emergency. You can't do it just to circumvent a filibuster. You would need to get a majority vote on the budget committee to revise the resolution, and the budget committee is split 50-50, so that means you need a Republican. And they're obviously not going to do that. So Democrats can pass a bipartisan reconciliation bill, to infinity. So that means that they will only get one more, I think just one more reconciliation bill with a new budget resolution, a new fiscal budget resolution. So that does put a wrinkle into, as I think I mentioned on a past show, I think Democrats need reconciliation to extend the child tax credit proposal, the child tax credit expansion that was in the rescue plan. So if you only get one more and you got to use it for infrastructure, is that going to leave child tax credit off the table? Or can you get 4, 5, 6 Republicans to do both things? So there's a lot of pieces here. A lot of pieces.
Yeah. Now, Bill, something happened this week that alarmed me because I didn't know that this was possible. Apparently, if your readership is measly, you're allowed to quit blogging. And I didn't know that this was, if I had known this was an option on the table, I might have quit years ago. But apparently, one can just up and quit. You don't have to keep blogging. And Donald Trump did that. And I think this is really an interesting thing because if Donald Trump can't get readership, then how can any of us be saved?
I gotta say, I feel like Donald Trump could have put more marketing muscle into this blog site of his. I mean, I don't. There could have been some Facebook ads. There could have been some radio ads on talk radio stations. They kind of just threw it up there and thought that the traffic was
like if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
But they didn't just come, and he wasn't posting. He wasn't updating that much. He wasn't doing the. Andrew Sullivan kind of had this all figured out, I think, in terms of how often you need to post and fresh content. But it does make me think that there's such a difference between Twitter, where Trump could basically, think of it like a blog is like a house, and you need to go out in the street or somehow yell or invite people in, and they have to come into your house. But Twitter is where you go out into this, you take your message into the streets where people already are, and it's just so much easier. And it just really strikes me like the dichotomy between getting a message out on Twitter versus the medium that you and I think, really cut our teeth on, the blogosphere. Again, if Donald Trump can't make it in blogging, it's hard to imagine anyone could do it. With the caveat that maybe he could have, promoted it a little better.
Twitter, all these social media sites, you're essentially creating a nonstop party. And so you're going to where the people are and trying to get your message out. And Trump was trying to build something from scratch. And that takes effort. Trump has enough supporters out there that if he wanted to put in a lot of effort into building a social media site that, where he was the Zuckerberg, he could do it. I know it's fun to mock him for another business failure, but we have to square the fact that Trump is getting over 50% support for being the Republican nominee again, 2/3 support the Republican Party for running again. 2/3 Republicans think Biden's not legitimately elected president. 80% think that Liz Cheney should have been purged. Trump has supporters. There are people in the world, people in America that like Donald Trump. And if Trump wanted to leverage that into making a profitable social media site, I'm sure he could do it. He would have to do more than just throw up a couple blog posts, but he could do it.
Okay. I agree. If he burned a lot of calories and put a lot of work and effort into being a professional blogger, yeah, I think he could have done it too. I agree. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted it to be easy, and it wasn't. And I think that is telling. Like, if Trump had enough juice that he could just put up a blog and have people come and spread his message for him, he would be more powerful than he actually is. Like, Trump does not have he is not so popular that he can just willy-nilly put things on the internet and have them catch fire without pushing them. That's something, right?
I think this says more about how social media works than it says about Donald Trump's bond with the Republican Party and the Republican Party base.
I think that's right.
I mean, Jerry Seinfeld once said...
But he doesn't have Twitter, and he doesn't... I don't think he has Facebook. He doesn't have Twitter. He doesn't have Facebook either.
Right.
So it makes me wonder, like, how much of his success was premised on his ability to have Twitter. Like, if Twitter didn't exist, would Trump have been president even?
Yeah, I think it is a misnomer to say Twitter made Donald Trump. I don't think that is correct. Trump had a persona and a message and an attitude that resonated with a large swath of the Republican base, and that's why he became president. Twitter was just one medium in which he did that. I mean, he had a lot of free media. He had a lot of TV and radio and to get that message out too, which he can still commandeer. Yeah. I mean, maybe not as easily as before, but he can still go to Fox and still go to Newsmax and still go to OAN. And if he says something, if he endorses a candidate or gets involved in a Republican primary, that still makes news. He still has tools at his disposal. Yeah. But Jerry Seinfeld once said that now that he's this megastar, I'm not quoting exactly here. He said if he goes out and does a stand-up show, like, that gives him 5 minutes. He gets a 5-minute cushion that a unknown comic would get. But after that, he better be funny. If he's not funny for the 5 minutes, it doesn't matter that he's a big celebrity. And Donald Trump is sort of the same way. He still has to deliver some goods if he's going to attract eyeballs and attract attention.
He's going out on the hustings again. I mean, I think Saturday night he's speaking at some North Carolina Republican Party event. He's apparently going to be doing rallies. He's going to be endorsing primary candidates. And we'll see if that does the trick. The blog obviously didn't work. Will Donald Trump being, on the stump or whatever on the rally circuit, will that matter? But I don't know. I don't know that cable news is going to cover it the way that they used to.
Well, it's not the way they used to, but Fox will. I mean, Trump will maintain his support within the Republican base, which is the majority of the Republican base. I don't think that's going. I mean, I guess I don't want to be a flat predictor here. I don't think that's going to diminish much, but I think it does matter. There are people that say, 80% of the Republicans want to purge Liz Cheney. Stop pretending there's a civil war going on here. Like, this war is over and Trump won. I think that gives too short shrift to that 20%. Republicans need that 20%. Or maybe 33% if you look at who Biden's legitimacy, or do I want Trump to run again? If Trump is shrinking the party, even just on the margin, that could make an enormous difference in 2022, let alone 2024. And the more Trump is out there making everything a loyalty test, does that just slightly erode the Republican Party a little bit more every month, every year, to the point where they can't get beyond the hardcore base? It's not that small a base, but it's not as it stands today, it was not a majority base. It was not enough to win the presidency, to win the House, or to win the Senate.
Yeah. It makes you think also just the opportunity that Democrats have, and I don't think they're fully capitalizing on it. I mean, Joe Biden was the perfect candidate to exploit this moment, and he still could have lost the election pretty easily, but Biden won, and that was their best, by far, I think the best Democrat that Democrats could have put front and center. And it makes you think, I mean, they could be running up the score big time right now, winning over, erstwhile Republicans, and I don't think they're exactly doing that.
Well, you look at Biden's job approval for the past 5 months, very stable. 53, 54, almost all the way through in the RCP average and the 538 average. And, Biden had 51.8% in the popular vote. It's all tracking. Like, we have been pretty stable. I mean, we're polarized but stable over the last, maybe into the Trump presidency. Trump's numbers didn't move all that much during his presidency. Democrats had a great 2018. They did slightly worse House popular vote in 2020, but still a majority. And nothing's really moved very much. So the question in my mind is, we look at 2022, the normal course of events is that the governing party has stress put on their coalition because they're governing, they're compromising, there are trade-offs. Some promises are unfulfilled or get broken, or they do what they said they're going to do, but it doesn't pan out quite like you thought it was going to. All these things stress the governing majority while the opposition puts their differences aside and just focuses their fire on the president. So when you get to the midterm, the president's base is weakened, opposition is galvanized, and almost every time it's good for the opposition party. But if we're stable, if the president's coalition is remaining as is, and Trump is ever so slightly eroding his party, well, then you're going to get something that's akin to 2020. I mean, it's not that, that is highly unusual for a midterm, but not totally unprecedented either.
Yeah.
Now,
I guess I think my criticism is partly premised on the idea that Biden was like the one guy who could have pulled this off, and he's a million years old. Now, look, maybe he goes on to be a 2-term president, and you can't ask for more than that. And the pendulum swings, and all it takes is one, like Barack Obama, a young guy that we didn't see, or lady that we did not see on the horizon, who has that charisma and can appeal, to moderates, and they're back in the game.
My late father, for the longest time, was always terrified of George P. Bush. He thought George P. Bush was going to, run someday. It's a Bush.
He will.
He's Latino. He would be, kryptonite to Democrats. And so here he is, the lone Trumpy Bush, doing a primary challenge for Texas AG, thinking that he's found a soft target in the incumbent Republican Texas AG. It's a very, George W. Bush didn't, go up the ladder from like Texas Ag Commissioner to AG. He went straight to governor. Jeb Bush went straight to governor before running for president. Yeah, so he's taken an unusual path for Bush to take, both in being partial to Trump and in running for these down ballot offices. But perhaps,
well, remember though, Texas had a Democrat and Richards as governor, so Bush could run against a Democrat. Texas now has a Republican governor, and I don't think there's no term limits, right? Like Rick Perry was elected many times.
That's right, and Abbott's running again.
George P. would have to primary a sitting Texas governor, which would be a lot harder than primarying a sitting attorney general.
He could stay as ag commissioner. He could just hang out as ag commissioner and wait for governor to open up. But he clearly thought that was too weak a position to be in. He needed to move up the ladder in some way to prepare for a gubernatorial run when the opening arises, and he thought he got a better target with the AG's race than the governor's race.
Or maybe just go straight to the presidency. Maybe skip the governor. You don't need to be governor anymore, right? I mean, Donald Trump changes it all.
But to your point, if Democrats can't solidify I mean, if Biden is just this temporary stopgap and that other Democrats can't replicate once he's off the stage, maybe there is a successor to Trump who has broader appeal than Trump does, and George P. Bush could theoretically be that person someday. Now, I don't think it's a given that Kamala can't replicate what Biden did. I think she's got time to broaden her appeal. But to get back to 2022, it's not a given that what's stable today will be stable tomorrow. If Biden does this deal with Capito, if Biden comes down further and accepts only $500 million in new money or less than $500 million in new money, makes concessions on revenue, accepts some user fees, doesn't get all the corporate tax hikes that he wants, some people on the left will be mad, and maybe they even lose some votes in the House and Senate. If he's picking Republicans, it might still pass. But that's the kind of thing that puts stress on a governing coalition. The question then becomes, is it minimal stress? Because most Democrats, by and large, are happy to see Biden deliver on things, and they are terrified what Republicans would do. Biden's still moving the ball forward. He still wants to fight for this or that. Maybe he can get something. Maybe get one more reconciliation bill that has some more partisan stuff in it, and that's enough to hold the coalition together. There's a whole lot of uncertainties on both sides of the fence as far as who can be the most unified here. Governing makes things harder to remain unified, but I think Trump is a element that, he unifies in a sense, but he unifies a relatively smaller portion of Republicans that I think it's an unusual factor that's not present in your average midterm.
Yeah. And going back to George P., one thing that really bothers me is that it might work. Like, think of the moral hazards and the lesson that this teaches. It could very well be that people like Liz Cheney, we've talked in the past about whether there might be any political motives behind her move or if it's just a profile in courage. It's very plausible that people like Liz Cheney, who did the right thing, will not have a bright future, and that people like George P. Suck up to Trump, live to fight another day, and then evolve later and find a way to become a compassionate conservative again, maybe keep some of the Trump people on board, and 10 years from now the world's a different place. And it wouldn't have happened if George P. hadn't sucked up to Trump, and so in other words, by being a political survivor and kind of a chameleon, you live to fight another day, and it pays off. I think that's such a horrible example if that works.
A politician named Bush being a political chameleon to survive in a severely conservative party. It's hard for me to see that happening. It's such a strange set of circumstances. Well,
look, there's no doubt that all politicians, by virtue of being politicians, have to make compromises, have to adapt. I think with Trump, sucking up to Trump, it's a qualitative difference. That I don't think it's a fair analogy. I think this is worse. Don't you think so?
I mean, if you have a soul, sure, but George H.W. did Willie Horton, and said like that's the cost of doing business. And he was flirting with the John Birchers way before then.
Well, the Willie Horton thing that George H.W. Bush did, I think, was fair game. Now, that's different than the ad that was run by, a super PAC or whatever they were called back then.
But there were plenty of ties between Bush and those people. They all knew what was going on.
Well, I don't know if George H.W. Bush knew. Lee Atwater probably knew, his campaign manager. I don't know. Do you think George H.W. Bush was like, gonna Gonna run stealth ads.
Yeah,
gonna take him.
I don't believe he disavowed them. I don't think he condemned them for using, a image designed to play upon racist fears. He knew with a good cop, bad cop game that was going on.
Yeah, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm naive. I feel like George H.W. Bush. It's a tough business. There's no doubt about that. And probably he did some things in order to succeed that were unseemly. But I feel like in the grand totality. And by the way, I was never a Bush fan, I don't know if you would imagine that or not. I never really liked George H.W. Bush. I have a greater appreciation for him now. Like the more I've learned about, particularly the unwinding of the Cold War, like managing the how do you unwind all of these former Soviet republics, and just from just a logistical standpoint, I have sort of a more of an appreciation. And I also thought Bush was wrong not to go into Baghdad. I was like, why don't you go in and just take out Saddam? I mean,
Bush Senior.
Yes. That's who we're talking about, right?
Yes.
We are talking about George H.
But I think it's very much in the Bush DNA that you do what you got to do to get into office. And then once you're there, maybe you can be more above board when you're there. But there's this hard separation of ethics between campaigning and governing. And look, that's not all that unusual for any politician. It's just very stark with Bush's. And look, George W. Bush, ran a hell of a number on John McCain in South Carolina, if you recall.
Do you think George W. Bush ordered that?
Did he order it? Did Rove do it and didn't bother to tell the boss? And no one was wagging their fingers and trying to wash their hands of anything. They let that stuff go and just said, hey, I guess someone's doing this nasty stuff with John McCain and saying and doing all this racist stuff about his daughter. Hey, what are you going to do?
I bet you, I don't remember the details, but I bet you W actually condemned it at the time.
I do not have any. I mean, I'm happy to be corrected. I don't recall him coming out and saying.
I would imagine he was asked about it and said, I can't do a good W impersonation right now, but whatever the case may be, maybe I'm naive. I feel like these handlers, and I'm not saying it's because the politicians are beyond reproach, but I just suspect that these handlers want to give them plausible deniability.
Oh, sure.
That they don't even.
I mean, I'm sure he has the plausible deniability, but he wasn't saying to Karl Rove in the back room, "Hey, stop this nonsense." Grover Cleveland told his people, "Don't traffic in scurrilous rumors about James Blaine. I'm not going to stand for it." I don't think any Bush was ever saying that in any of their campaigns. I mean, just look at the conventions themselves. I mean, I know we're going down a way, deep down rabbit hole here.
I just went back and watched again Pat Buchanan's '92 convention speech. I just went back, the cultural war speech.
Yeah.
Some great stuff in it. I mean, there's obviously some controversial stuff in there too, but the line where he's like, he's talking about kind of working class whites, I guess. And he says something like, they don't read Adam Smith and they don't read Edmund Burke, but there are people, we grew up with them on the playgrounds. They're conservatives of the heart. And that, when he says something like, and we need to reconnect with them, which I think was a harbinger of things to come. And also there's a line in there where he talks, because I thought about this as someone who, as we wrestle with whether the Republican Party is salvageable, he says something like, he's talking about the Buchanan brigades, and he says but I'm here with George H.W. Bush. The Republican Party is my home. The Republican Party is our home, and it's time we come home to the Republican Party. Something like that. It was a good speech.
I mean,
I liked it at the time.
I mean, there's also bigoted in places. Let's also remember that.
Yeah, and I wonder if Pat burned a lot of calories talking about, I'm using quotes here, homosexuals and women in combat. He brings that up 2 or 3 times, and I wonder if Pat had not done the social stuff, but had stuck to the kind of economic populist message, I wonder if it would have been different.
Well, I mean, the contrast. I mean, the history of that speech is. I mean, this is a speech that helped the Republicans lose that election. Bill Clinton was able to get white working class support, particularly in the South, while supporting gays in the military. So playing that social conservative card was woefully insufficient to overcome the economic dominance of that campaign. People felt Bill Clinton was... There's so many.
I think it's wrong to attribute the loss to the Buchanan speech. There's so many variables, including...
But it clearly wasn't
Bill
enough.
Clinton's
it didn't do the trick.
Well, I mean, Ross Perot gets 19% of the vote. Bill Clinton's a political animal. The guy was just a great...
Perot drew evenly. So I've written about this. Steve Kornacki's written about this.
I'm not saying that Perot did it either. I'm just saying there are a lot of variables, and I don't think it's fair. I mean, you're not the first person to do it. I think the biggest variable is that, George H.W. Bush raised taxes, A. B, it's hard for any political party to win 4 consecutive presidential terms. C, Bush had already kind of achieved his raison d'etre, and he had the sky-high approval ratings, and I think the world was ready the country was like, okay, great, you Republicans did a really good job, and now we're going to move on. And then I just think Bill Clinton was such a talent. And just like I said, how Joe Biden, who doesn't have that same political talent, but right man at the right time, I just think the stars really aligned for Clinton. And so I don't think that the Buchanan speech, it gave them something to talk about.
Well, I think I think it's more than just Clinton having talent. I mean, all the things you mentioned, I think, are important factors.
Yeah.
But I think those factors have some greater salience. I mean, we know, looking back not just from '92, but more recently, like culture war appeals do have their potency. They do have impact. But I think we also know that they can be insufficient to negate or overcome economic appeals. I mean, Bill Clinton was not just a guy who had talent. He was someone that working class Americans felt understood their plight and would deliver benefits to them. And I don't think it's just, but I think it's also cultural. It's not just that Bill Clinton was going to give them money, but that Bill Clinton was a regular guy. He wasn't from Massachusetts, for one thing. Right.
He was a regular, just good old boy. And I think Joe Biden has that too.
Well, that's exactly my point. I mean, Trump got quite far with culture war appeals and maintained a very large segment of support, even made inroads with some people of color communities with culture war appeals. But it still was not enough to beat a guy who the average American, regardless of race, can look at and say, that guy gets me. And that guy can talk in a way that is inclusive, that is not bigoted, that can speak very progressively about race and sexual orientation, if he also talks in the language that says he gets me in my plight.
Yep, absolutely. That'll get you a long way. Obviously Pat Buchanan's politics and mine are very different. But there's something about him, and maybe it's because he was like a speechwriter. He was of the conservative movement. He was also a journalist and a political commentator. and not just a politician, that I think had a certain appeal. And I also think Buchanan loved politics in the way that someone else, Chris Matthews, loves politics in a way that's become unfashionable, but the game of the sport of politics. I'm trying to get him on the podcast, Bill. I just read Chris Matthews' new book, his new memoir. I don't know if we're going to be able to land him or not. But I think that it's funny how these guys who, I mean, I used to love watching, let's say, Chris Matthews and Pat Buchanan together, like on a hardball or something like that. And I think that their style of like, let's fight about politics and then go have a beer. I mean, the stereotypical Tip O'Neill Reagan thing is also not in vogue. Although Joe Biden probably has a little bit of that going on. I don't know if he drinks beer, but he has that attitude.
I don't think he does. What's interesting about Matthews, a bunch of stuff going on, didn't get a lot of attention. He got, forced out of his show at MSNBC because of comments that he made to a guest that seemed to be, objectifying and made people uncomfortable. And Matthews left, apologized, and was invited back to the show, the show that replaced his Joy Reid show. He was Joy Reid's guest this week or last week to promote his book. I didn't see the whole segment. I don't know if they mentioned the past or not. But I thought it was notable on both sides that he was invited on, that he was going to go on and have it kind of be, no big thing. That kind of.
I was impressed by Joy Reid and I'm thinking. Likely that Chris Matthews had maybe helped her out at some point by having her on. I don't know. But I was impressed by her. And she also, by the way, I think gives him a blurb in his book. I think that she's on the back cover. So I was impressed by her that she did that, because I'm sure there are some in the progressive community who would say, enough with this guy. He's the past. He holds these antiquated whatever.
Well, Joy Reid said a few things herself in the past that got some folks on the left and right mad, and yet she kept her job.
I'm not sure she said that. I think she might have been hacked. Whatever the case may be, I thought it was a stand-up thing that she did by having him on. And Chris Matthews is someone that also I don't probably agree with on a lot of his politics, but I've always found him interesting. And his book Hardball is amazingly good. I mean, it's probably 25 or more years old now, but it was such a good book, and I read it many years ago. But his new book's good too. Check it out.
All right.
And if you're watching, Chris, I want you on the podcast.
Anything else we need to talk about?
No, I'll just do shameless plug. I just interviewed yesterday, Bill, our friend David Pietrusia. And we had a conversation about D-Day, because the anniversary of that's coming up this weekend, I think. So check that out. But what a mensch.
You should have asked him about Warren Harding in Tulsa. Because we just had the Tulsa Remembrance.
Well, I did a show with I interviewed Tim Madigan, the author of The Burning, about that. So,
but Harding was president during.
Go ahead. I didn't know. Did the president have anything to say?
He did. That's the thing. Harding was president during the Tulsa massacre, and he did comment on it and expressed, disapproval. Probably not with the same kind of force and moral righteousness that you might want to but again, context of the time and all that. This is at a time when the Republican Party was still more or less the political home for African Americans, although that had weakened. Taft had moved away from that, was trying to connect more with white Southerners. Woodrow Wilson gets the endorsement of W.B. Du Bois. Then, of course, Wilson resurrogates the part of the federal workforce, so he loses that Democrats lose that black support. And so Republicans are still holding on to it in the 20s. This is actually an article that James Robinault, who's a Harding biographer, wrote last year. And said it was just 3 days after the horrific violence in Tulsa. Harding spent the weekend worrying over how to respond. Finally, he decided to accept a commencement invitation from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the nation's first degree-granting historically black institution. And he said in that speech, despite the demagogues, the idea of our oneness as Americans has risen superior to every appeal to mere class and group, and so I wish it might be in this matter of our national problem of races. He also said, I think specifically to Tulsa, so Robinault says he also spoke briefly about Tulsa and offered up a simple prayer, quote, God grant that in the soberness and God grant that in the soberness, the fairness, and the justice of this country, we never see another spectacle like it. Again, this is at a black university. Does that make war?
I didn't know that's news to me. I didn't. I didn't know that he weighed in on it.
He weighed in on it. Coolidge after him, also tried to maintain black support. Spoke at Howard University, started some money their way. Try to promote the allies of Booker T. Washington, who had passed by that point. So they were trying to walk these lines politically. And it doesn't make them heroes, and say they made them the greatest voices for racial equality on this planet. But it is notable history that it was news at the time, even though it was buried after the fact. It was news at the time, and Harding felt some obligation to comment on and express his disapproval of it.
You mentioned trying to appeal to white Southerners, and it's interesting. My book Too Dumb to Fail, which I wrote, it came out in January of 2016, so I wrote it mainly in 2015, and I'm so proud of that book, and partly because I keep hearing things that confirm some of the things that I did in the book. And I had a chapter, you may recall, when I'm explaining what happened to the Republican Party to get us where we are. I had a chapter on when the GOP went south, and about how, at one point you might remember it was like Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott, and like the entire party was like, everything was Southern, and I was just listening to a podcast the other day with David French and Jonah Goldberg, and David French brought up the Southernification of the Republican Party as one of the things that happened, that changed, that led the Republican Party to where it is with Trump. And then Jonah went into Fox being based in New York and the sort of bridge and tunnel populism, which I think was also something that helped Trump. But I think the effort to the fact that the power dynamics of the Republican Party has moved to the South, the Deep South, is a big underrated part of the story.
The Taft wasn't able to pull it off. But later,
Taft couldn't do it, but he had his own Ross Perot to contend with, maybe his own Donald Trump actually to contend with, right?
Right. I don't think that was the problem. I mean, he did have that problem that TR split the Republican Party, but the Democrats of the South weren't ready to embrace Republicans yet. It wasn't until the real break on civil rights in the 40s that began to shift.
Well, we'll see what David Pietrusia has to say about that, Bill, the next time we talk.
All right. All righty. So we'll DM Zoom. We'll DM Zoom tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll do the DM Zoom. I think we took last week off, Memorial Day weekend. I I had stuff going on, and I think you might have too. So, but we'll be back in the saddle.
All righty. Till then, until next week.
See you guys.